I had been dating George for 2 years when he suddenly texted me, saying his family was pressuring him to get married. I had a brain fart and replied, "No worries, go ahead and get married first." That same night, social media exploded with headlines. George gets pressured to marry and gets dumped. Girlfriend tells George to go marry himself. When I got George's message, I was all decked out, hitting a bar late at night with my best friend. "Linda, why are you so bundled up? You're not a celebrity." Under the spotlights, a hot girl twisting in the center of the dance floor squeezed out of the crowd and plopped down next to me, throwing shade. I paused with my hand on my mask and suddenly thought she had a point. When I used to go out with George, I'd dress like someone with a severe cold, just like him. I couldn't shake the habit right away. With that in mind, I pulled down my mask. Fresh air rushed in, mixed with smoke and alcohol, and my furrowed brow relaxed. Let's dance. That's the spirit. When did our Linda ever hide her true self for a guy? My best friend Mandy wrapped an arm around my shoulder, yanking off my jacket to reveal a strappy, spicy outfit underneath. Her almond eyes squinted in approval. Nice. The music from the dance floor pulled me in, and after a little dancing, I left my mind behind. Who doesn't like going wild these days? Just then, my phone pinged with a notification. It was noticeable, but I ignored it, waiting until I couldn't dance anymore to head back to our table. I casually pulled out my phone and saw a message pop up. It was from George. "Babe, my family's been pressuring me to get married lately." I was stunned for a moment, my brain not fully engaged, and I blurted out, "No worries, go ahead and get married first." I'd been secretly dating George for 2 years. He was always warm and courteous, not to mention he took great care of me, and he was tall and handsome with a slim waist. Aside from rarely seeing each other, there weren't really any downsides. By the time I realized something was off with my message, it was too late. I frantically tapped my screen. Delete. Delete that message. In my frustration, nothing changed. The message had been sent 3 minutes ago. I slapped my phone onto the table with a thud, but soon there was another ding. I nervously turned my phone over. It wasn't a message from George. It was a headline on Facebook: "George gets pressured to marry and gets dumped." I swear, I had no idea George was live streaming. So, in the next couple of hours, I watched the trending headline with my own eyes: "Girlfriend tells George to go marry himself." And the comments were no help, filled with joy at our expense. I really want to know who George's girlfriend is. This was the first day I knew George was in a relationship, and the last. I scrolled through the comments, feeling dead inside. "Stop laughing, stop laughing. If you keep laughing, I'll die of embarrassment." Right then, a unique ringtone came from my phone. My heart skipped. It was from George. "Where are you?" he asked. I glanced at the colorful bar around me, swallowed hard, and replied sheepishly, "On the way home." With that, I grabbed my jacket and left. If I leave now, doesn't that mean I'm already on the way home? I didn't get a reply, assuming George was already waiting for me at home. Until I reached the bar's entrance and saw a tall figure wrapped up tight standing by a car. In the moonlight, his usually gentle eyes were deep like they held hidden depths. His phone screen was still lit. Great, caught red-handed. What a surprise. I instinctively wanted to run under his intense gaze. But before I could, he grabbed me with a low voice in my ear. "Why run? Let's go home and talk." He sounded calm, but I sensed the tension beneath. Talk about what? Life decisions? My waist? I'm doomed. He walked over, naturally holding my hand, without a hint of emotion in his voice. "Let's go." I obediently followed him into the black Range Rover. He thoughtfully buckled my seatbelt before driving off without looking away. Sitting quietly, I couldn't help but steal glances at him. His hands looked good, with long fingers and broad palms. I couldn't help but think of how nice they felt at night, my cheeks turning red. "Why did you say that?" he suddenly asked, breaking the silence in the car. What? I was thrown off, slowly recalling tonight's events. After a moment, I said, I don't have control over my marriage. Our families were both considered wealthy. My parents divorced early on, and my dad remarried. There wasn't any dramatic scheming like you'd expect. My stepmom was nice to me, probably because she was also a pawn in a wealthy marriage. As for me, my dad already planned to find a suitable match once I'd had my fun and reached the right age. But whoever it was, we only needed to maintain a superficial facade. Not that I cared, having accepted this arrangement long ago. I glanced up, noticing his expression was somber. I wondered what he was thinking. The drive was silent, with the scenery rushing by, quickly reaching his home. Before getting out, I pondered and offered, if you feel wronged, I can give you a breakup fee or resources. It might have sounded cold, but I couldn't think of any other solution. Silence. More silence. But judging by his expression, he seemed even angrier. He opened the door and got out, and after hesitating, I followed. George. As soon as I stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind me with a thud. In front of me, a man leaned in, his gentle eyes filled with desire. Before I could speak, a passionate kiss landed, and after a long time, I heard his hoarse voice. What are the terms to marry you? I'll do anything to earn them. Just don't leave me. He was so close that his warm breath tickled my ear, his deep voice entering my mind. I stared at him in shock, my heart pounding loudly in the silence. Suddenly, I recalled our first meeting. It was at a business gala. I noticed him right away, and no wonder, his looks were remarkable, even better than on TV. But compared to other entertainers with forced smiles, his expression was calm, not mingling with people. Later, a boss tried to take advantage of him, reaching for his hand. He had this obvious look of disgust on his face. Not sure what I was thinking, but without really thinking at all, I walked over, grabbed his wrist, and pulled him behind me. John, this is my boyfriend. Because of who I am, John was annoyed but didn't say anything. After John left, I turned to him and apologized. Sorry, I saw you weren't happy, so I said that. Didn't mean to be so abrupt. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared at me, then nodded slightly, his ears turning red, and he said softly, thanks. His voice was really nice, cool and crisp, like snow on a mountain peak. I was a bit smitten. Back then, I thought someone like him would be hard to get, but unexpectedly, after a few times of bringing milk tea to his set, he agreed to be with me. I suspected I won him over with milk tea. In these 2 years of dating, I moved into his apartment, and we got along surprisingly well. He never brought up marriage or anything, so I always assumed we were on the same page about just dating for now. My surprise must have been obvious. He shifted slightly, looked down at me, and gently tucked my loose hair behind my ear. His voice was low and soft already, but now it carried a hint of something more, and it was a bit hard to handle. The beating of the heart in my ears was indistinguishable whether it was his or mine. My mind blank, I instinctively put my hand on his chest, looked away, and blurted out, "Isn't your family pushing for marriage? You should have a date lined up, right?" With his qualifications, finding a good girl outside his circle should be easy. I subconsciously pulled back, regretted it as soon as I spoke. But before I could take it back, he lifted my chin, making me meet his intense gaze. And then, before I could react, he kissed me again, not as gentle as before, with a hint of punishment. His face was stormy, like there was a brewing storm, and after a moment, he pulled back slightly, breathing heavily, seeming to hold something back. "Are you planning to dump me?" His tone made me feel like I was some heartbreaker preparing to run off. I shook my head immediately, not knowing what to say. Given my current status, I couldn't promise him anything solid. The mood turned quiet. Just when I thought he was going to press for a real answer, he suddenly sighed lightly, his voice warm. "Hungry?" His face was back to the usual, clearly not wanting to continue the heavy conversation, his gaze sweeping over me. "I'll make you something. What are you wearing tonight?" He paused, eyes landing on my outfit. What am I wearing? I looked down, following his gaze. In the commotion, my coat had been pulled open, revealing the spicy outfit underneath, a tiny top and mini skirt, hot and sexy. Facing his now darkened eyes, I instinctively covered myself more, cheekily asking, "Do I look good?" He never restricted what I wore, but somehow, being stared at by him like that spelled trouble. Especially in this intense mood. His temper still simmering a bit. I was about to make a dash when suddenly my wrist was grabbed, and a low voice sounded by my ear, "Take off the coat." I turned to see his other hand impatiently loosening his tie, eyes flickering like little flames. The next second, he pulled me closer, his voice a bit hoarse now. "Here?" Wait, weren't we talking about food? The next morning, when I woke up, George had already left for his schedule. Rubbing my sore waist, memories gradually pieced together. Before dawn, he seemed to have said something, but I couldn't quite recall. Just vague phrases, something about George's family. Shaking my head, I figured it must not be that important. When I reached the office, I was just on time. "Linda, morning." The front desk girl greeted cheerfully. I nodded back, "Morning." After graduating from university, I returned to the company, working my way from a junior position to the general manager in 3 years, proving myself with capability. But I wasn't the only child. I had a half-brother, Leon, my dad's illegitimate son, who was also trying to rise in the company. Officially, I was still the heiress, but many said the company would eventually be Leon's since I was just a woman. I didn't mind. I believed the capable get the job. In the office, I focused on the files in front of me. The company had a big case at hand, and doing well could boost my standing with the board. Lost in work, I was startled by a knock on the door. I looked up, calmly saying, "Come in." Next moment, Dad's assistant, Martin, came in, politely saying, "Linda, Jack wants you in his office." "Dad? Why suddenly?" I was instantly alert, feeling a bit uneasy. I quickly tidied my desk. "Okay, I'll go." Following Martin, I headed to the chairman's office. Dad was talking with Leon, and when he saw me, his brows furrowed slightly. I politely greeted, "Dad." Hearing this, Dad's eyes narrowed, signaling everyone else to leave. Once alone, I tightened my fingers slightly, pouring Dad some tea, cautiously asking, "Dad, was there something you needed?" Ignoring the tea, he directly got to the point. "You're not getting any younger, and you've played around long enough. It's time to settle down. There's a banquet next month, someone I'd like you to meet." So soon? He's already arranging my marriage? Even though I kind of expected it, it's still hard to swallow when it's actually brought up. In the past, I would have just obediently accepted it. But now, I felt a bit irritable and couldn't help but argue back, "Dad, I don't want to get married yet." Hearing my words, his expression darkened immediately, and he slammed the table. "Ridiculous. You're 25. If you don't marry now, who will want you when you're old?" I was taken aback, and the words that were about to leave my mouth suddenly disappeared. An invisible pressure filled the air, making it hard for me to breathe. My mind was pulled back to those painful times. My parents divorced when I was just 10. When she left with her suitcase, there was rare relief on my mom's face. I cried, gripping her hand, begging her not to go. But she pulled her hand away, crouching down as usual to see me eye to eye. "Linda, if I stay here any longer, I'd go crazy." I always knew my parents were childhood sweethearts. In the beginning, they were in love. But my dad was a typical chauvinist, always controlling Mom, from what she wore to what she said. He'd frown and scold whenever he didn't like something. So, the once lively girl became a silent wife. She endured it for me for 5 years, but now, she didn't want to endure anymore. When signing the divorce papers, my dad mocked her, "Why mess things up when everything's going well? You're not taking the child with you." He was very controlling and came from a powerful family, so Mom didn't win custody. She had to leave with tears in her eyes. So, at 10 years old, I lost the loving mom and only had a strict dad. If I ever messed up, I'd get a harsh scolding. The worst was when I skipped class, and the teacher told him. I ended up locked in the storage room for 3 whole days. He wouldn't listen to my explanations, maybe didn't even care. The storage room was dark, with no light, and it sealed away all my rebellious thoughts. After that, I became the perfect rich girl he could show off. By the time I left the office, the sun was already up. The sun was shining on me, but I didn't feel any warmth. I just smiled bitterly. Seeing this, my assistant Tiffany came over, looking concerned. "Linda, are you okay?" I shook my head, trying to cheer myself up. "I'm fine, you can get back to work." "Okay." The young girl left, looking back every few steps. I was about to return to my office, but after a few steps, I heard a cool voice. "Being a rich girl isn't easy, is it, Linda?" It was Leon. He had one hand in his pocket, leaning against the wall with a smile. When I looked over, he raised his eyebrows. I stopped, composure back in place. "What do you mean?" "Don't get me wrong, sis. I've got no bad intentions. I just think a girl like you should be treated well. You shouldn't be working so hard at a company," he said with a smile, acting like he cared. I found it ridiculous. I might hate my dad, think he's cold and too strict, but the education and resources I've had are because of my status as Linda, the rich girl. Besides, my dad's right sometimes. If I were nobody, how could I protect the people I care about? Seeing me quiet, he stepped closer. "If you want, I can help you marry him." Him was clear. But I didn't believe he was that kind-hearted. I took a step back. No need. I'm not blinded by love yet. If I really left this family, forget George, even I'd get nothing. Hearing my words, Leon's eyes flickered for a moment before he smiled again. "Cold as ever, sis. But if Dad finds out you're dating an actor, I wonder what he'd think." "You're threatening me?" I narrowed my eyes, not as relaxed as before. He shrugged, still smiling. "Why would I?" Seeing his look of control, I spoke coldly. "Mind your own business. Your mom seems to owe a lot too." My words made his relaxed demeanor change instantly, eyes sharp. I clicked my tongue softly, turned around, and left. He really thought I was easy to push around. I went back to the office, got busy, and forgot the time, along with my troubles. Unknowingly, the sun set, and the golden glow poured through the windows. Suddenly I realized how late it was and checked my phone. George had sent a bunch of messages. "Baby, did you eat lunch? My scenes are a bit much today, so I might not come home for dinner. Why aren't you responding? I'm downstairs at your company." I stopped at the last message, sent an hour ago. Startled, I immediately called him. The phone barely rang before he picked up. His pleasant voice came through without any impatience. "Finished work?" For some reason, just hearing his voice warmed my heart a bit. "I'm coming down now." After hanging up, I grabbed my jacket, threw it on, and ran downstairs. As I reached the elevator, I instinctively glanced toward my dad's office, relieved to find it empty. George's car was parked nearby. When I knocked on his car window, he rolled it down and glanced at me. "Why are you sneaking around like this?" "I'm not someone who can't be seen. You're a public figure. You need to be mindful," I replied as I opened the door and got in. I remembered some messages he sent earlier and asked, "Didn't you say you had a lot of scenes today? Why come pick me up?" He started the car and drove off. Without looking back, he said naturally, "My girlfriend's not in a good mood, so I had to speed things up." I was stunned when I heard that. How did he know? I never said anything about my mood. The lines of his profile were smooth, his features gentle, bathed in the warm light of the sunset, incredibly soft. George sensed my gaze, turned his head slightly, and explained leisurely, "There are only 2 reasons why you wouldn't reply for a long time. You're either asleep or upset. Since you're at work, it's not the former. His tone was so casual, but I felt my eyes getting a bit misty. I teased, why not consider that I was just too busy? I always thought I hid my feelings well. Even Mandy sometimes couldn't tell when I was upset. He seriously replied, you think anyone stays offline for 8 or 9 hours these days? Come on, let's not think about the stressful stuff. Let's eat. He didn't ask what specifically had happened, just kept his eyes on the road ahead. Outside, downtown scenes flew by swiftly. I glanced at him, feeling something budding inside. After that, I was busy with work, meeting with clients and handling business. Leon, who once tried to provoke me, barely appeared in my view anymore. But I stayed cautious, feeling he wouldn't give up so easily. In no time, half a month passed. George came to pick me up after work and took me to a private restaurant. After dinner, before we even left, his phone rang. My left eyelid twitched. Remembering what Leon said before, a wave of unease washed over me. George didn't show any change in expression as he answered the phone. Mike, what's up? On the other end, his manager Mike had a loud voice. George, is it true you're dating Linda? The internet is going crazy. What are they saying online? I tried to listen closely, but George stood up, walked toward the door, and covered the phone, saying to me, hang on, I'll be right back. I didn't say anything. Once he turned away, I took out my phone and checked Facebook. Unsurprisingly, the topic of George and Linda was skyrocketing. I've always loved gossip, but I never thought I'd become a topic myself. Those bloggers know how to pick titles. Wealthy heiress secretly meets male star at night. In the past, I'd scroll right past this kind of stuff. Now that it's about me, it's not as fun. I clicked in and saw someone had posted a photo of me getting into George's car outside a bar. The comments were piling up, several every second. No way. Could George's pressure to marry be about Linda? Honestly, George is just an artist. How can he marry a rich heiress like her? Can't believe George would be a kept man, living off her. Hilarious, maybe Linda's the one who's keeping George. The comments were brutal, and I felt my cheeks heat up with anger. Just as I was about to fume, my phone rang. It was Mandy. I answered, and Mandy's furious voice boomed, did Leon do this to you? That little punk? Hasn't he caused enough trouble already? I scowled, guessing Leon was frustrated about me sealing a deal, especially since I was officially Jack's heir. The board wouldn't keep favoring him. He must have panicked and decided to drag me down with him. After a moment, I spoke slowly, then let's not hold back. Don't worry. I'll get my brother to sort this out. Mandy assured. Mandy had a brother who managed M Group, but she didn't like asking him for help usually. Hearing her support warmed my heart, thanks. Don't mention it. We grew up together. Who else would I look out for? Just be sure to handle your dad. I will. After we hung up, I looked up to see George standing at the door with conflicted eyes. My heart twinged. Did he think he was dragged into this by me? But before I could say anything, he turned and left. My heart felt hollow watching him walk away. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. He cared so much about his career, he must have been upset, right? For the next week, I didn't get a single text from him. The trending news had been bought off with money, but people kept insulting him, saying he was a kept man. Some even doubted if he'd bought his awards. I scrolled through the comments, feeling worse by the second. I took my frustration and turned it into motivation. Booked a flight to the US, and closed the big deal all in one go. Turned my nights into days. 5 days later, I returned home just in time for the banquet my dad mentioned. I really didn't want to go, but Mandy said she was going too and didn't want to be alone, so I reluctantly agreed to accompany her. When we arrived at the party, Mandy looped her arm with mine and asked, "Did you guys break up?" Noticing I seemed distracted. I didn't respond and regret began building inside me. If I had ended it sooner, maybe it wouldn't have affected him so much. After everything blew up, Leon didn't get off easy. Mandy and her brother exposed some of his shady deals over the years. My dad was so angry that he couldn't bother with my love life for the moment. The banquet hall was buzzing with elegantly dressed guests and clinking glasses. I spotted my dad talking to someone, his lips pressed together in a firm line. "Linda, come here," my dad's voice cut through the noise. I walked over like a zombie. The man next to my dad was tall. I forced a smile and said, "Hi," without even looking up. But before I could say more, a familiar voice greeted me warmly, "Miss Linda, hello." That voice? My head snapped up to meet those familiar eyes. He had a slight smile on his perfect face. George? He looked completely different from his usual casual self, decked out in a fitted suit, looking every bit the wealthy gentleman. But what was he doing here? Before I could figure it out, my dad, as authoritative as ever, said, "This is George. You guys should have a chat. I've got something else to attend to." I nodded absently. Once my dad walked away, I grabbed George's hand and led him to a corner. "Are you the Smith's son?" I knew about the Smiths, a family as prominent as ours. Everyone in the circle said their son was studying abroad. Who would have guessed that the widely known George was their son? He didn't deny it, nodding, but my parents didn't want me in the entertainment industry at first, so I wasn't supposed to rely on them. He sounded relaxed, but I was stunned. So, his long absence wasn't because he was angry, he was back home? Now that he's acknowledged as the Smith's son, does that mean he'll quit the industry? Over the past 2 years, I've seen how hard he worked and how much he loves acting. A tidal wave of guilt swept over me. I let go of his hand, looking down to hide my tears. "George, I'm not worth this. How could I ask him to give up everything for me?" The next moment, I was wrapped in a warm embrace. A deep voice whispered in my ear, "But I hate seeing you struggle. I want to help you." His voice was soft. "Linda, you know what? I love acting, but I love you more." My fingers clutched tight involuntarily, and my heart swelled to the point I thought I'd cry. As a daughter of the Lin family, I was always taught to be excellent, to succeed. Everyone always said I was excellent, but no one ever said I worked hard. "It's okay, don't cry." He wiped away my tears with his thumb. "With our families teaming up, won't we be unstoppable?" He was joking, but I couldn't laugh. Tears rolled down my face. Such a fool. When we got home that night, I was still processing everything, staring at him intently. Seeing my gaze, he walked over, eyebrows raised, his expression soft. "What's wrong?" I wrapped my arms around his neck. Something came to mind, so I asked, "Don't you still have a movie to film?" "After this film, I'll go back and take over the family business," he replied calmly, probably to ease my guilt. I stood on tiptoe and kissed him. He slightly pulled back. "What's up? So forward all of a sudden?" I lowered my eyes and finally asked, "Why do you like me?" "I don't feel like there's anything special about me worth liking." As my words hung in the air, silence followed. Then he lightly pinched my cheek. I looked up, meeting his laughing eyes. "Do you need a reason to like someone? You just standing there is enough for me to like you." Our engagement was quickly settled, with plans to marry the following summer. During the year, George was busy with a TV drama, and in his free time, he helped coordinate the wedding. I continued working at the company. With our upcoming marriage, and my dad not being in the best health, recognizing my abilities, he started giving me more responsibilities. Later, during a board meeting, he publicly acknowledged me as his successor. The announcement caused quite a stir in the industry. In just a year, I reformed and refined the company's management, growing its success. Meanwhile, I also founded an entertainment company, signing artists and gathering resources. I couldn't just let him give up on his career. By July the next year, George and I returned home together. Seeing us arrive, my dad had a rare gentleness on his face. "If you both feel ready, pick a date and get your marriage certificate." In a business alliance, romantic feelings aren't usually necessary. Trying to keep calm, I accepted the household register from my stepmom. She normally didn't involve herself in my matters, but she hesitated before handing it over. Looking at her serious expression, I met her complex gaze. Are you sure about this? She was only in her early 30s, well-maintained, looking like she was in her 20s. She could easily pass as my sister. Such a youthful age, trapped as Jack's wife. Understanding her silent question, I nodded firmly, yes. I guess I'm lucky. Even though it was a business marriage, I actually ended up with someone I like. Seeing my unwavering gaze, she suddenly laughed. Her red lips curled up, looking really pretty. All right. As I walked out of the villa, I couldn't help but think of her smile. It was just like my mom's when she left back then. Maybe she figured it out too. I shook off my thoughts. George was already outside, bringing the car around from the parking lot, waiting for me at the gate. As I approached, I heard him on the phone. His agent's voice was laced with regret. George, is everything online true? Are you sure about this? I'm just changing careers, that's all. It's really you, though? No need to say more. Instinctively, I opened Facebook and saw that a piece of news had hit the trending list. But it wasn't entertainment news, it was local news. The Smiths' son and Linda are getting married soon. Since George's face is so recognizable, fans quickly spotted him, flooding the comments section. Comments just kept rolling in, good and bad. As I was absorbed in the comments, a special notification popped up on Facebook. George, finally marrying the person I love, I hope for your blessings. The news caused quite a stir. I looked up quickly. In the sunlight, his features were striking. Under his dark hair, his deep eyes gazed at me tenderly, filled with strength. I couldn't help but laugh. I typed a message and sent it, signaling for him to check. Next moment, it was his turn to be surprised. George's phone buzzed with tons of messages. All sorts of major screenplay offers. He glanced at them and then strode towards me, puzzled. Where'd you get all these connections? I swung my phone, giving a sly smile. I'm quite the boss, you know. How could I not hook you up? George has a brother. Their parents always wanted both kids to take over the family business. But George wasn't interested, so he boldly entered the entertainment industry. Some people may frown upon acting, thinking it's a messy field. But there will always be those who love it. There's no shame in passion. He chose to marry me at the peak of his career, and naturally, I'd support him in reaching the top. I never demand that the untouchable descend from me. I'd rather see him ascend the throne. Liking each other is about mutual completion. He stayed silent for a long time, then smiled, as bright as stars. Then I guess I'll just have to make money for you. I burst out laughing, teasing him. Can I hit on you then? With pleasure. Our wedding was quite grand. During that time, some old Facebook posts from George resurfaced. They were from 2 years ago, just a photo. He had just wrapped up filming, resting against a cushion. His fair hand rested on his forehead, black hair falling down, revealing half of his handsome face, and prominently featured was a cup of milk tea. With a single line, the milk tea is sweet. I looked closely at that milk tea. Obviously, I had brought it in the afternoon, but by evening, he still hadn't drunk it. I was chuckling at the comments when my phone was snatched away. Standing before me, the man wore a perfectly tailored suit, loosening his collar, his deep eyes fixed on me. On our wedding night, shouldn't we be doing something important? I nodded. You're right. His eyes lit up, but the next moment, his smile froze. I pulled out a stack of red envelopes, grinning. Come on, let's count the money. Epilogue. Why are you dressed like that again? At the bar, Mandy looked at me, dressed like I had the flu, and couldn't help but tease. I leaned back on the couch. Can't help it, with how famous I've gotten, many recognize my face. Being spotted at a bar isn't great. Mandy scoffed. George's family was nearly outraged. It took ages to persuade him to leave showbiz, and here you are, setting up an entertainment company to back him. He likes it. Hearing my words, Mandy's eyes twinkled, then she hugged me. When are you setting up a company for me? I'm sick and tired of this place. My dad's company was always meant for my brother, and yet I'm here working for free. Her coaxing made me smile wide, and I didn't play hard to get, join my company, just clock in and leave at will. Really? The very first job of being a boss is to benefit your best friends, right? But before I could bask in this idea for long, my phone's special alert sounded. I snapped back, checking it. It was a message from George. Where are you? I glanced at the colorful bar lights. Wasn't he supposed to be filming a night scene? How could it be so coincidental? Every time I came out to hang, he seemed to catch me. My fingers moved swiftly, replying, on my way home. The next second, an audio message popped up. I clicked it. His calm voice filled my ears. Still at the same old bar? Stay there, I'll pick you up. There was nothing off about his tone, but knowing him as I did, I felt an accounting moment coming. Guess our baby-making plans need to be fast-tracked. George first met Linda in high school. She was brilliant, beautiful, and appeared to shine whenever she stood. His gaze naturally gravitated toward her. Everyone said, Linda's a rich girl, of course, she's brilliant. But only he knew she worked way harder than any other girl. Once, she didn't do well on a test, and to him, it was just one test. Sure, she didn't ace it, there'd be another chance. Unexpectedly, she broke down emotionally, crying alone in a corner. It was then he realized she was under a lot of pressure. He wanted to comfort her. But after observing her for a while, he noted that whenever she wasn't happy or seemed on the brink of breaking, she would dive into her studies, becoming unreachable. So, he'd just sit on the other side of the wall, waiting silently until she felt better and left. That corner occasionally had some bad kids popping by to smoke, so he had to watch out. Their only direct interaction was when he had a stomachache during a drill break. She passed by, noticed his pale face, and promptly got him to the nurse. Hearing there wasn't suitable medication there, she took him to the hospital, missing several classes. After he recovered, he didn't see her for days. Word had it her father had locked her up. A few days later, when they met again, it seemed like she had already forgotten him. After graduating high school, they hadn't seen each other. Until he graduated college. His family pushed him to manage the company, but he wasn't interested. On the contrary, his younger brother was better at it, so he stubbornly went into the entertainment industry. He didn't expect to run into her again at a business banquet. At that time, the boss treated him like an ordinary entertainer, being inappropriate. He was about to walk out when unexpectedly, she stepped in to help him. Compared to high school, Linda was more beautiful, showing signs of a career woman. But she still seemed to have this habit of helping handsome guys. How could someone be so adorable? After that, Linda unexpectedly came to the set to see George, bringing milk tea with her. To be honest, George didn't really like sweet drinks, but knowing Linda brought it, he drank it even when it got cold. Thanks to those few cups of milk tea, they got together. They lived together for 2 years. Linda was a bit forgetful in life, easily forgetting things when busy, but she always remembered all of George's likes and his birthday. Later, George's family pressured him to get married. He didn't expect Linda to say what she did. That's when George learned that Linda had never been in control of her own life. It was that way in school and at work too. Linda was bound by responsibility and pressure, moving forward relentlessly, but George didn't want Linda to be so exhausted. He decided to return home. Naturally, George's parents wanted him to leave the industry and take over the family business. His one condition was to marry Linda. The match was suitable, so George's parents had no objections. But George didn't expect Linda would do so much for him. Linda supported George's career. When he looked at those scripts, George just felt his love for Linda hit the peak.